TVOT.
Wonderful panel. Thank you for sitting in the audience here with us today. We are talking about envisioning the evolution of TV UX. So with me today, we have Tim Cutting, Head of Consumer Electronics, Digital and NVPD at Gracenote, Field Garthwaite, CEO of Iris TV, Michael Jeffrey, VP of Business Development, Music and Video for TiVo, George, oh, now I'm going to mess it up, Tippolitis. Okay. Director of Fire TV at Amazon, and Jeff Weber, CEO of Zone TV. So thank you to our wonderful panel. And to kick us off, just this is the only question I'm going to go down the panel with, I promise. Sort of a chicken versus egg question. What has the greatest impact on the TV user experience, the way people are living today, or the way technology in which we view television is changing?
So I'm going to answer with a neither. And
well done.
The reason is I think content distribution and licensing is actually having the biggest impact. And the fact that certain content we want, you can only get with this subscription service, certain content you can only get over here. And it is driving the UI. It's driving it to needing more powerful search, more active discovery, but ways to find that content, because it's more fragmented now, I think, than it was even 5-10 years ago.
But is it because of the tech? Just saying.
The tech will save the day.
Field.
I'm going to go with user experience, changing user habits, and the way that mobile consumption, for example, is essentially driving so much of this connected TV, like TV everywhere. And then also, I think that in many cases, people are changing their habits, the way that they, pay for cable, right? The price point has been very high for a long time, and as people have more choice, I think it's going to lead to, just bundles on top of cable packages, on top of 5G packages. So I'm going to go consumer.
I'm going to build on its mobile consumption. It's what Field just said. Think about for a second, 5, 7, 8 years ago, someone quoted official that said, no one will ever, it's very authoritative, no one will ever consume a feature-length video on a mobile device. And it was quoted and restudied, and everybody agreed. You laughed a second ago.
Because it's not true.
It's not true.
I know, watch him my commute.
For me, it's the mobility, which is technology. We are now consuming, sometimes I'm consuming on my tablet with a large screen that's off in the living room because I want that personal experience. So I say it's the technology, the mobility.
I agree. I think it's a technology that's really made such a change. If you look at the plethora of content that's being created, all the different content types, how customers are consuming that content, whether it's mobile, TV, all the different segments out there, I think it's technology that's made the significant change that we're seeing today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think consumer demand, consumer desire has changed that much. Clearly, what they're able to do has changed a lot. And I do think it's the tech. There's a little bit of DVR, maybe a little bit of mobile, and all of a sudden people start getting a taste of the ability to do whatever the hell they want. And they've wanted that all along. They just never had the opportunity to express that. So I really think it's the tech.
Right. So from mass media to my media. So George, Golden Krishna, who's a designer from Google, has said that the best interface is no interface. And I have a two-part question for you. First is, do you agree with that quote? And second is, how is Amazon approaching simplification of the user experience?
I do agree with that quote. I think the simpler the interface, the better the customer experience, as long as you do it the right way, obviously. If you look at TV over the past, 60, 70, even 80 years, it's been a pretty simple interface, and it's done some pretty amazing things in terms of audience reach and people looking at content, how they consume content. So it's actually been pretty impressive. The user interface has been simple. The complexities behind it has been obviously very complex, the systems behind it. Now, when you look at what Amazon's trying to do in this space, as I mentioned earlier, that a lot of content is being generated right now. Short form, long form, originals, traditional, then you've got OTT, you've got all these apps moving to this space, you have original content being created with a lot of these network providers, and then customers have different ways to actually engage with the content, whether it's through a streaming media player, whether it's smart TV, whether it's subscription-based, as you can see, there's so much complexity in all of this. And what Amazon is trying to do is trying to simplify that for customers. Bring that all together in a way that is content forward, because we think ultimately it's the content that matters for customers, and then put it to them in a way that's simple that they could consume. If you look at the devices that we've launched this year, between Recast, the Cube, the latest stick device out there, you're seeing, and the Fire TV Smart Edition, you're seeing Amazon's attempt of simplifying that for customers and really getting them to engage with the right types of content.
I want to second build on that. I think it's about simplifying what I call frictionless experience. And I think, Tim, you mentioned something a second ago, which is great. No consumer understands, why can't I get the video that I want on the device when I want? What do you mean I can't get it on this thing? It's only allowed on that thing, and all that complicated rights and licensing. So I think simplifying, and then the other piece I'll plug on it, to make a really simple or make the interface go away, there's a ton of data behind the scenes to get to simple.
Well, sure. And so, Tim, part of what enables that, also enables personalization, is the metadata, which surfaces the content. And GraceNote has been doing a lot of work in that space. And can you take us through where we are now and what that means for the user?
Yeah, I think it's, for most of us, looking at the audience and kind of our ages, I think we all remember the kind of scrolling guide. If you wanted to watch TV, you might have to tune into a channel, and slowly you would watch channel 3. You were hoping to get to HBO pretty soon before you timed out. Obviously we're well beyond that. We have interactive guides, but a lot of what goes into these guides, we like to call it GraceNote factual data. So it's, the movie, the cool poster, maybe a factual description. And a lot of this factual information is what's feeding these great systems like Alexa or these voice systems where you're able to kind of ask for a fact and get something back. I think we're really kind of moving into that more descriptive age now, right? So we're going to talk more in this panel about profiling. We're going to talk about how does Alexa get to know you? How do voice systems or AI? How can you actually have, a bot and interact with them? All of that means the systems, the data, the bots, the AIs have to get to know the content better, and they have to get to know you better, which means in some way they have to almost watch that content. Either they literally watch it, or we're feeding them data. So GraceNote, again, focuses on data. So moving into scene-level metadata, mood, themes, characters, right? I mean, a lot of us know you could probably ask a system to find you more movies based on James Bond. But if you really wanted to find movies with a character like Indiana Jones, I'm guessing you're going to trump the system. Most of them can't handle that complexity. And yet for natural language with all of us, I'm sure if we were talking, that's child's play, right? You ask a kid, more movies like Dr. Seuss, Cat in the Hat, and they start rattling things, or more shows, they start rattling them off, so...
Right. Well, and that's what's interesting there is, Jeff, Zone TV not only uses metadata and AI, but also human editors to help curate for clients. And how at what point in the process is the human integrated with the machine? And is it an interim step to deal with this natural language problem, or is it a permanent part of the solution?
Yeah, I tend to think it's probably permanent. And we love the tech at Zone TV. We're heavily invested and all in, right? But we still think video is about passion, and there is something that humans bring to the table when we're talking about passion and interest and all of that I think is interesting. And so when we program we call them show streams, but playlists, we're really doing that as if it's a linear channel. You're trying to tell a story. You're trying to bring that together. And then we really think about using the tech to enhance that. And the AI is about, I have a show stream that a human has built. We call those human zoners. The zoner has built that for the Motors channel or Styler or whatever. And then the AI, I may be interested in one of those shows, but then I can zonify and it really personalizes from there. So they work together. Now we have a pretty healthy debate between the zoners and the engineers about, who's going to take over the world ultimately. What in my chair, what I really love is I kind of don't care. We can just let the market and let consumers tell us what makes sense. My bet is we'll have both for a very long time.
Right. So Field, Iris TV provides clients with white label software that helps them build audiences on their O&O sites, personalization powered by deep learning. Sort of similarity there. Now it's personalized for each user, and I remember in an interview you did there, the content recommendations were surfaced by popularity. And what I'm curious about is with machine learning, does it play to the middle of the bell curve? And what if I like really esoteric content, like, Korean wrestling? I don't know.
And who doesn't?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You too.
Actually, surprisingly, that's not niche.
All two of you guys.
I totally guessed.
I think that goes back to the question you asked George as well, because when you have interfaces that are very simple, even if humans are selecting what content is there, right, in an OTT interface or on a web page, you have a narrow amount of content that can be exposed, right? There's only so much real estate. So one of the things that we developed around this to solve it, which is really interesting, is what we call AD testing. So an A/B test, you're often kind of comparing to, you can do it against a control,
I understand
right?
AD, so AD.
And so like AD, you're running A, B, C, and D.
Oh, okay.
Whereas D is a random group. And so you actually expose a small percentage of users to a random selection. And if you have a
Surprise.
large enough client size, it's really effective towards
great.
exploration. And so the way that our technology will use that data, it's basically tied into business rules. So we have controls over our AI, so editors in the same way can essentially manage the different settings, which is essential for like a news client, who
Sure.
breaking news about the Mueller investigation, or there's a hurricane, and this metadata appeared yesterday. Those are kind of the difference between what we do and someone like a Grace Note. We have to do this on the fly. And so those business rules allow us to kind of manage with programming controls. But AD testing will allow us to then explore in situations that aren't as tense or specific what content is working really well that you wouldn't expect. And then the machine learning, or what we call asset value, actually incorporates that over time, and then we'll recommend it to a larger set of users.
And
Just to build on that a little, so at TiVo, there's the recommendations platform is doing exactly this, where you're applying some surprise. There's some correlation or some relationship one of your machine learning has identified, and then you pick a victim set. Test set. Let me get this right. And you actually sometimes deliberately test for the tune away, the click away, the not select, and you measure that, and you're reinforcing. Or conversely, you're testing, you're exploring the boundaries of relationship and connections. And the important piece is about measuring that, so you're fine-tuning in algorithms. How often do you introduce surprises? And different people respond to surprises at different rates of likes and dislikes. Let's leave it at that and get to know how often do I freshen up. Yeah.
Interesting. Jeff, Zone TV also uses machine learning. And do you have ideas around, sort of the pitfalls, dangers, things we have to be careful with around that?
Well, I think if you're going to say you're personalizing channels, you better personalize channels. And getting good quickly is really important. And so I think that's probably the biggest hurdle to get past, is to make sure you're really delivering what that individual thinks is relevant. And, so Tigers and Tiger Woods and all those examples that we've seen, right? And so I think to me that is, because you lose somebody immediately if you tell them you're going to personalize and you can't get it right. And so, just sort of.
Well, the expectation now is increasingly, like if I see something
As
that's
it
off,
should.
I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Bias jumps in there from the provider too, I've noticed. I had an unnamed music service that was really leaning towards hip hop. And I never listened to hip hop. Every time I go to the homepage, it was always hip hop. Right? They've got data on me. They know what I'm listening to. They know, they can present a profile, but the bias, and many of you may feel the same for Netflix, right? Netflix clearly wants you to watch their originals.
Right, the originals
It doesn't necessarily mean it's the last one you watch, which is way down the UI, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's, kind of the derivative or the recommendation based on something you last watch. So I think that's an interesting thing for this topic too, is just how providers put their own bias in.
Yeah, the editorial.
But you have to be
is a
careful
killer.
with that, because you're going to dump out of product, and it's a delicate balance.
And understanding the state of the customer is really important at that point. Do they know what they want to watch? Quickly get it into their content. Are they in a discovery mode? Understanding the customer's mentality is going to be critically important. And if you throw up too many roadblocks, when they're not in a discovery mode type mentality, will be a disservice to the customer.
Right.
Whereas Netflix has been open about that, right? They kind of are like self-congratulatory about how they're promoting their own content, right? And they know that some of that other content's going away. But in other cases, like you need to have levers that you can actually manage these things, or else, it's kind of
Right.
Well, see, it certainly leaves it open as an opportunity, right? Like you A/B test yourself, like, okay, here's bias with some cool originals, but here's someone else that's giving you right what you wanted because it nailed it. It knew you, it knew the content, and whether you were in discovery mode, whether they asked you, right? I mean, that's part of the conversation today too, the fact that none of these AIs have much dialogue right now. It's kind of one way, but imagine
moment.
not too far in the future where you're actually dialoguing, and
Right.
maybe to George's point, Alexa's saying, what kind of mood are you in? Are
Yeah.
you open for a recommendation, or should I be presenting you what I think you want tonight?
Well, Michael, I want to jump to you.
I want to jump on the bias point for a second.
Right.
We all say bias. For when we think about it for a second, when we're personalizing content to a person,
It's bias.
by definition, that's bias. You can say, oh, but it's a good bias. Okay, versus a bad bias. Like recommending too much of your personal content at the expense of the delight of the consumer. But the important piece is the content that's being presented to me that I like may be different than what you like.
Right.
And you. And so that's by definition narrowing down and making a consumption experience that I like at the moment, and maybe not neutral across a bell-shaped curve.
But I think the way I think of bias, and completely understand what you're saying, when I think of bias, it's not intentional. So if it's intentional, and maybe I'm choosing to put my stuff in there and I'm choosing to do that at too great a rate, that's a mistake. That's not, in my mind, bias. Bias is when you're doing that and don't know it. And I think it's really
Well, that's unconscious
important-
bias versus
really
conscious
important
bias.
for a company to be clear. If Netflix, sort of hard to argue with what they're doing, they've made a decision. We can debate whether it's good, bad, or otherwise, but they've made an overt decision, and they'll figure it out if
and
it's
they're
right.
public about it, right?
Yeah,
And the consumer
right.
knows.
Yeah.
That's,
If they don't know
right.
what they're doing, or they're trying to be sneaky, I guess is a different issue. But if they don't know what they're doing and they're just putting things in there that are wrong, that to me is when you fall.
Yeah, that's the unconscious bias that's really dangerous, where you are producing personalization and you're not even sure what went into it and why.
Right.
And then the other one, the continuous learning, where you're not actually testing, do you have bias? So that's where
Right.
you're doing your A/B and then ABCDs. Actually do teach a little bit that you may be personalizing maybe a little bit outside. You might get
Right.
surprises.
Especially if
So-
you don't test those.
Well, I just wanted to jump with sort of where we're talking about where we're headed in the future. And Michael, you've had a career where you have been on the cutting edge of change. And lately there's been a certain amount of talk for the future, driverless cars, that this is going to be an entirely new, sort of the new living room, these new opportunities. I mean, I watch movies on my commute on the train, not in the car. That would be a little frightening. But what are your thoughts on
They
that?
are recording this. So
Right?
the police are outside.
Right, be taken away. What are your thoughts on driverless cars, and also what are we looking at in terms of timeframes?
It's an easy one.
Easy one. We're not looking at it next month, according
No.
to a large electric manufacturer CEO. It's not next week or month. My best guess on the driverless car experience is in the 5 to 10 year horizon, in my opinion, at scale.
But that takes planning if we're going to be ready for it.
I was going to say, but there's a ton. An interesting one. Had discussions with content owners. And it's quite remarkable to find out that the connected car, which I do believe is here and now, is new licensing.
Oh.
And there's all kinds of things about how you promote, how you advertise, and then you peel that back a little bit. Jeff, you might know this has come up a bunch with OEMs. We've been in discussions, and it goes, we're working on it, but we actually have to go back to rights holders
Oh,
who
right.
made the back catalog content and clear those rights, which we all know what that means when you go back to people that created it already. Say, I need to get the right to put it in the connected car, and the answer is sure. How much money are you going to give me?
Yeah.
So first off, there's a lot of work to actually build out not just the personalization, the recommendation, all the connectivity, but there's also all the rights, the content, building out
The
those
rights account.
experiences. You've got the short form versus long form. Do context matters? Do I do mostly episodic or mostly
Right.
UGC? So all of that kind of stuff is before us. And because we're having connectivity in the cars, so starting at the end of this month, starting next month, all cars shipped in Europe will have for the E91 mandate. If you crash a car in Europe, it'll call the authorities.
Oh, really?
Even if you don't want them to. And so the OEMs now have connectivity in the car because they have to, just like we did the GPS chipsets in mobile. And so OEMs are asking the question, okay, I have that. I could spend a little bit more money on a plan per month, and I could offer a connected experiences. What do I want it? How do I personalize it?
Right.
Et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's upon us, and it's pretty exciting and pretty cool. I think if you looked out over the next 5-10 years, like we said, you'll never watch a feature-length movie on your mobile. I say, I won't make that bet. I say you watch feature-length movies on your ridiculously long driving commute. It might even have assisted driving for you.
While you're in the driver's seat?
While you're in the driver's seat.
Oh, so is the glass going to be the windscreen? Is that where... Oh, man.
What, the car's driving by itself, right?
Well,
Why
then
not?
what? Yeah, who's going to complain? Oh, I'll get nauseous, though.
There you go.
So, George, jumping also to sort of the user interface, Amazon is clearly a leader in voice, and it really simplifies things elegantly, except for my Scottish friend who has this really thick brogue and can't get anything. But we sometimes hear about the digital divide, and I'm wondering about if we're on the verge of a voice divide, where not only accounting for different accents, but more importantly, what if people have disabilities? Somebody's had a stroke, or they stutter, or cerebral palsy. How do we accommodate for that?
Natural language understanding is a deep science. There's a lot of innovation happening there right now. And unfortunately, it's not my area of expertise. Where I come into play is how do you tie the customer intent when you translate that voice interaction to what they actually wanted to do on the screen.
Right.
Now, with that being said, we need to be paramount with regards to accessibility and understanding users' needs, because you don't want the user to be frustrated, right? Because if they have an experience where they're not expecting or it's not working for them, we've got to be mindful of the customer experience. Now, with that being said, when you look at the actual TV experience and you introduce voice, understanding what the customer is actually trying to do and how they've actually connected that experience, whether it's the voice remote, whether it's a far-field device like the Cube that we launched, or whether they've paired an Echo, understanding if the customer says, hey, go play X, is X the movie? Is X the song? Right? What are they actually looking to do at that point in time is actually a very complicated problem that, we're looking to solve on a regular basis.
How much frustration, for lack of a better word, can a person take before they decide they're not going to engage? I mean, you must have a feel for that.
Not much, right? I mean,
I know I can't.
Yeah.
Voice.
What we're noticing right now is that when customers, pair an Echo device with their Fire TV, the amount of engagement that the device has is almost 2x, right? So they love that interaction, that voice interaction, but you've got to be good at it. There's only so many times you're going to ask a question and then not get the outcome that you're looking for, and you won't be frustrated about it. So we're always, making sure that we're improving that experience.
I want to build on a question you asked about how your dear Scottish friend. So at TiVo, there's a whole graph technology machine learning company that Rovi acquired a number of years ago, Vivio out of Boston, a lot of MIT. And there's a whole line of lexical connection and actually adapting that to cultural norms, how people pronounce and enunciate even the same title of a movie or a song. There's the intention natural language problem, but there's also people describe scenes, settings, and moods culturally different.
Right.
That 5-year-old that knows the way they'll express it, maybe in Scottish or in French or in Japan, actually is different. So there's a whole semantic and thematic meaning, but you need to be able to link them all back to the same titles. And then, of course, what's trending, what's popular, what's promoting, and all of the context that matters.
Does the tool actually learn in the household specific? Does it, or is this development going on back office stuff? Is this Alexa, for instance? Do they will my Alexa learn my linguistic quirks?
From an Alexa perspective, I mean, it's all in the cloud. It's always learning how to do things better.
Okay.
Now we do try to optimize the experiences based on what the user, what they're entitled to, what they've bought in the past, things like that. But in terms of how it actually operates in the home, it's all cloud. It's all from that perspective.
I think there's 2 points to separate here. One is, and both these guys kind of commented, there's the technology of understanding what came out of your mouth,
right,
and translating intent, as George said, and then there's having the semantics and taxonomies to know what to do with it. Right. So,
good
I think,
point.
yeah.
Well clarified.
Within the third point of context.
Right.
Yes,
well,
context
context being
matters.
so
The
important.
context will matter at that point.
To answer, I just want to build on your question. All of the systems today, whether it be Alexa, I know the team there, they're voracious appetites for data, and sometimes it's social data, trending data, the way something is expressed on a social. You've never even spoke it, but you had a friend, Scottish again, that told you something, texted you, Facebook, Snap, whatever your communication of choice.
Tablet.
And you asked your dear Alexa that question, and it worked. Like, doggone it, how did it work? Because Alexa picked that up hours earlier, because you're behind the times, and as a lexical phrase, it's gone viral, and you've built the lexical pieces, the data's fed in, and it's waiting for you. And by the way, you're like the 6,000th person that's expressing it that way, even though you think you're special.
I'm not hip to it. Field, sort of building on some of this we're talking about is also inclusiveness, diversity, and in the news a lot is about the importance of diversity for products so we don't run into unanticipated blind spots. And we were talking earlier about unconscious bias. How do you protect Iris TV? How does your algorithm, how do you protect that from happening?
So AI and media is a fairly new thing, right? It's only a couple years old. We were talking about unconscious bias and kind of feedback loops. So this all comes down to who writes the code. And often when you see with, say, like image recognition algorithms that are inadvertently racist, right?
Yeah.
It's often because they were white people, writing the code.
Right.
So there's ways to combat both in education and getting people of diversity, right, kind of working on it. But then it also comes down to like what the goal is that's being kind of optimized against, right, which is kind of setting that bias. In the case of a lot of the walled gardens where this has emerged the most often, it's often around time on site. Or time spent in an application. And so it reinforces often an existing bias in the person, and then it's really hard to solve for. So if you're just solving and trying to get someone to spend a lot of time on app, it's been proven. Science released one of the studies that came out on this where things that are actually really harmful or misinformation actually spread virally much faster than facts.
Right.
It's like global warming is like really not a great news topic to cover. Like no one wants to learn about it or hear about it on the news.
Or like vaccinations and things like this.
Yeah, just kind of it's not a topic that it makes you want to kind of like jump at, right? So as a result, we see these things shared on Facebook, and it can be misinformation or fake news, but it also can be things that are really harmful, like hate speech. And going to the kind of vernacular and certain terms and lexicon in, say, a language like Burmese in Myanmar, that wasn't found for a long time, and it actually helped kind of facilitate a lot of hate speech against the Rohingya, which is like a really horrible thing. And it's why now Facebook has, 100 editors actually like working in that language in the region. So this is a topic that like I think is the most important cultural phenomenon with AI right now. And so there's not an easy way to solve it, but for media companies, I think they have a real advantage, which is they have quality content. They have actually invested in editors to make these decisions and filter this stuff out. And if you actually have a better user experience, because none of us are going to argue that they've all had pretty poor user experiences historically compared to YouTube or Facebook or Instagram. But if you improve the user experience and you make it a better one, and then you have content where you're actually covering issues from both points of view, hopefully, right? If you're just picking one outlet that's very partisan, you're not going to get that. But that allows you to then have the editorial voice kind of override it. And then you can expose people to a lot of different content because it does have that kind of overarching editorial oversight.
Sure.
I want to build on that one and I'm sure Tim has the same thing. At TiVo, absolutely have editorial or curated content as well as machine-generated, machine-learned AI data. And Jeff, you said there's some pretty healthy debates. Yeah, go in. When I walk into the content teams of several of the TiVo offices, I've learned to never challenge any of their editorial curators. Never. So it's very healthy. And then for the algorithms, there is a tendency to say we're just going to run it through the algorithm and not bounce it against the editorial content. And I think that's a mistake. You got to balance those. And if it's quite a bit different, it should be actually what we like to call, which is you need to put a break, a stop, and a default back to editorial. If it's professionally curated and it's wildly different at scale, you need to default to the humans.
Yeah, so our clients globally, a lot of them are news focused, right? And then, many verticals, but we have some of the biggest news clients in the world. And so those editorial teams are the ones setting the business rules. And if we went to market with like a black box, they basically just laughed us out of the room and never would have worked with us.
Right. One of the things, Tim, I'm curious about is, mood and interests and how do we surface this? Because again, how much will people put up with? I think I saw a study that our attention span is now shorter than that of a goldfish. Seems about right.
I don't know how they measured that.
I know, right? They're watching lots of goldfish, or my children. How important is the speed of recommendation? I mean, it feels like it would be important, and then also, how do you gauge mood? How do you filter that in?
I think they're both important. I think we were talking about earlier, how long does someone hang along for an Alexa response if she's not quite getting it? It's not very long, right?
Right.
We've sped up, so everything needs to be fast. And I think back to kind of the data behind all of this stuff, right? It really comes down to, we were just talking about kind of humans. And so we had a fun exercise at Grace Note recently, where they were testing out kind of creating these new descriptors. And so we went through these long movie lists, all of us. We went into this kind of white room and started going down through these movie lists and starting to kind of connect the dots as humans to other movies we found similar that fit into a particular mood. And we did it as kind of proof of concept. But what that is that's a training set. And that's what Grace Note focuses a lot on, is driving not just our staff, but humans to create these training sets with these taxonomies, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to do, like Netflix, we talked about in another panel, all the genres, we create our taxonomies, and then from that, then you use the machines to scale it out. Right, and so not every human in the room is going to tag every movie known to man over the last 100 years. So that's where the machines start connecting the dots based on these training sets. So I think the quicker you can get to these, you can get to quicker on the fly recommendations. Most of this stuff is training sets even for the AIs, right? After we've made the training set that's scaled to every movie that's been released globally. Once we've localized it, I think, MJ, you were mentioning there about the globe. Each locale, geography, language, culture may have different taxonomies or meaning implied, right? If you want an edgy science fiction movie, some people think edgy and probably think racy. Some people think edgy and, okay, maybe there's a lot of violence, right? So you really have to understand the meanings behind the language and also apply it differently in different cultures. And all of that goes into these machines that really know nothing until you train them, right?
Right.
So,
what about like chat bots? I mean, sort of remember that horrible Microsoft paperclip thing?
Yeah.
Looks like you're interested in watching something.
We're all aging ourselves knowing the paperclip.
You're going to talk about Tay.
Well,
how about this? Who doesn't remember the paperclip?
Nobody in the room.
Yeah.
But
one gentleman under 30 right there.
I thought you were going to talk about Tay, but I think we should maybe skip over that one.
The what? The which one?
Tay, the chatbot that they launched,
right.
which actually went fine in Japan, I heard.
Well, because they're not...
Well,
training it poorly.
I don't want to draw attention to what happened.
So I think we're there when the sophistication of the data going into these machines is there. And of course, some of it is tech. These machines are learning on their own. We were talking about self-driving cars. Certainly, as you feed these machines data about TV and movies, they're learning about TV and movies. Right. If any of you have seen the Alien franchise, I think one of the one of the guys that was later found out to be a machine had been just watching movies. They were on a long multi-year flight. They're just watching movies, and they were learning about life, right? And so I think it's no different. Science fiction is turning into real life. Alexa, Siri, Google, all of these AIs are learning about us. Pretty soon, they'll be able to carry a conversation.
Do we anticipate chatbots in media, or will they be not necessary? What do you guys think?
I want to give a contrarian answer. I think there's a whole bunch of regulatory and human things that have to be worked out first.
Oh.
Already
for
here.
what? What do you need regulatory?
Like for example, it's not it was done here in a restaurant, ordered, Google showed here, and they were very careful to make sure there was a human that answered the phone when the chatbot got on to order for your restaurant reservation, because there's a law against that.
Oh, that's
Think about
interesting.
for a second the car example I gave with licensing of rights. There are laws today with machines and interacting and doing certain things. Now, I'm poking fun at it, but it's very real, and you have to unwind those. Some were built 50, 100 years ago.
Right.
That's considered a
That might be a
recording.
little fear-mongering, Michael. Let's think about that. Are there any Netflix laws against an AI chat about a movie you want to watch?
Yeah, I think the simpler version is actually like in, say, Messenger or, WhatsApp or kind of a chat application, and then you chat with an entertainment service, and then you want to get a clip or you want to get
That's correct.
a news story. That actually is quite functional and is
Right.
catching on fairly quickly.
It's probably once you wander off the TV movie landscape into these more controversial
Another form of discovery
restaurant
that's new.
ordering topics.
Right. Well, Michael, so personalization and trust, and personalization breeds trust. It knows me. But then we also run into it knows a little bit too much about me. If anybody's read the data dump recently from Facebook, that was interesting reading there. So people are increasingly aware of privacy. And our 5 minutes. 5-minute warning, everybody. How does regulation potentially, like GDPR style regulation, affect UX?
So I think if you look at what happened in Europe, all the sites basically said, look, I'm going to be transparent and tell you I need to put cookies on it. There'll be 50 of them on the site. BBC didn't go dark. Eventually what the consumer says is, well, I want to get to it. I'm going to click OK to all of them and be done because I want that free content.
Right.
So that's what's really happening. So there's a transparency, and I think that's a good thing. Consumers taught more like, look, I want the free stuff.
I'm making the trade. I
And
get it.
I'm making the trade. So I think that's not a bad thing,
Right.
Maybe to raise the awareness. And then there's the other one you had about, well, what if my personal assistant knows too much about me?
Right.
So I think certainly at TiVo, those are all anonymous, kept, highly restricted. I think you need to give control of the human being and let them say, I'm going to restrict how that's used, so it can only personalize and recommend content for me. Can't be shared with any third parties, and that might mean I certainly don't get certain functionality. That's true.
Right.
And the right to get rid of that history. Maybe I
Right.
want to unwatch something.
And make it easy. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you have to treat it that way. Give the power and control to the human being. And then the transparency, I think, is a good, really good thing.
Okay, I think we probably have
Yeah.
time for one question. Question.
Okay, since we didn't talk about diversity, and since African Americans spend 10 hours a week watching video and 6.5 hours a day on social media, at the same time, the robots are kind of racist, right? And then we have the voice recognition issue, and we have, when you take a picture of a black person in front of like a window, you turn it to the black blob.
So I guess let me unpack what your question is. So we've got diversity issues, a high lot of.
Really kind of setting itself up to be anti-people of color, and is it going to become a situation where at some point it becomes dangerous?
Is there a concern about diversity with AI and if it's going to become dangerous? I think actually the panelists have talked about the importance of humans making sure that kind of bias is weeded out of the algorithms. And certainly there have been very notable, as you mentioned, problems.
Yeah, I think it's an inclusion issue with regards to design. So if you have those who are of color, and of different races and religions, kind of different backgrounds, you often end up with different and better products.
Right.
And so the more that we have folks actually
On the
getting
team.
engineering training, right, getting product training, and actually on those teams, this is going to start going away, because I don't think it's a technology issue. I think it's a people issue. So it's just reinforcing other problems we're seeing in culture
Right.
that we need to address as a culture.
Yeah, and that's that diversity thing of having a mixed group from the engineers to the design folks in the team. I think you're right. It's not so much a tech problem, it's the harder problem. It's the people.
Right.
You need the people.
Well, Thank you so much. That's our entire panel. Thank you to my wonderful panelists. It's been a pleasure. So, bye-bye.
Thank you.